Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Young entrepreneurs will be the future of space commerce, just as they are in most industries. My guest on this edition of the Ex Terra Podcast is leading multiple efforts, one that's involved in looking at ways to build on the moon, and the other working on advanced space robotics and STEM education. Madison Feehan is the COO of Space Copy and the co-founder and CFO of Moon Trades. And you're a busy woman, Madison, so thank you for taking time to join me on the podcast.
Well, I am so happy to be here, Tom. Thank you so much for hosting me. Yes, you are right. I have a very interesting trajectory.
Well, it certainly sounds like it, and I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. So let's start with an overview of each company and tell me what they do.
Absolutely. So I will kick things off with my pride and joy, which is Space Copy. Space Copy is an additive manufacturing company that I founded in 2022 with the goal of creating the first multi-purpose interplanetary manufacturing device that combines lunar regolith sampling through laser spectroscopy, data analysis using an algorithm-based machine learning software, material preprocessing, and 3D printing into one big mechanism. My goal there is to produce a manufacturing device that can operate in extreme environments to produce small to medium-sized parts and infrastructure that astronauts will need to sustain themselves in situ. And as an alternative use case for here on Earth, the technology can also be applied for manufacturing in remote environments for military applications. In parallel, Moon Trades is an exciting new project that I've recently embarked on this year. Alongside my incredible founding team, we are currently developing two technologies. The first is a STEM education platform that uses AI to create an interactive learning experience for users to teach them about space sciences and all of the cutting edge technologies that are currently being developed for the Artemis generation. And well, as a more long-term goal, we are leveraging the same AI technology to integrate it into a fleet of autonomous mining and tunneling robots. And those will be sent to the lunar surface to conduct reconnaissance and geographical surveying of all the habitable zones. And this will involve a combination of drones and rovers that will also be responsible for excavating regolith in those resource-rich areas of the lunar surface and conducting near real-time analysis of basalts using LiDAR and similar analysis softwares.
So give me a little bit about your background then and how you got into the space industry.
Very interesting story. Well, I am a space enthusiast turned aerospace professional. I am currently working at NASA in a contract position for various divisions, mainly planetary science, heliophysics, astrophysics, and as an entrepreneur, I split time between both of my aerospace startups. In addition to that, I'm a full-time student in the commerce world, pursuing a double major in international business and entrepreneurship.
So you're busier than I actually thought.
A little bit.
Is aerospace becoming more of a attractive career path for young women at this point? Because you think about it as being a male-dominated industry. As a young woman, how are you finding your acceptance in the aerospace industry?
It is an absolute challenge. It's one that I embrace greatly. Having broken into this industry, I was one of the youngest people to join NASA's NSPIRES division, which is where I'm currently working. There's not a lot of women in STEM. It's around 18% of the total workforce, and I love to be part of the greater initiative to try and bring those numbers up, promote equality through STEM, and try and get more females involved, especially young women. I think that there's such an interesting series of different paths that you can go down to become a part of science. It's not just engineering, it's not just mathematics. It's a really broad global industry, and I consider myself proud to be part of it.
Now, we're seeing a lot more advanced technologies being developed and utilized for our expansion into space, but is the space industry ready to properly scale in order to accommodate this expansion? And are we going to have enough trained talent to make that happen?
Absolutely. The industry is ready to scale. It's simply a matter of which channels you have to go through to make it happen. I believe that there's a lot of stigma in particular amongst investors and government stakeholders about how the new generation of space is being embraced, mostly because of how unconventional it is compared to the Apollo era. To put it simply, people want to see action. There are so many individuals and startups that are really flooding the marketplace for space right now. You really don't know where to look to find success. I see some people who are aware of how long it takes to actually manifest some of those hardware innovations and make it happen properly, while other audiences are interested in the shortest time to a healthy ROI. And neither perspective is wrong. It is the space economy after all. I guess suffice it to say there's enough input in both funding and brainpower coming from all the various channels like academia, industry, and government to support the development of all of the critical technologies that are needed to induce lunar colonization. But there's a great divide that's severing the ability for people to become directly involved in the process. And with the consistent input of all the brilliant people entering this industry, we need all the help that we can get to really break down those barriers and make things happen.
You just mentioned ROI. Are your two companies right now self-funded? Are they privately funded? Have you been through any fundraising rounds? Kind of what's that process been like for you?
Well, Space Copy is just bordering out of the pre-seed to seed stage. So we're getting ready to open a fund in 2024. We did a little bit of pre-fundraising throughout the pre-seed. We won a short NASA grant, and we also went through an accelerator program with Techstars. Couple of incubators, stuff along those lines. Great stuff. We even went through a program with MIT. Those people are the best. For Moon Trades, we are finally just kicking things off, getting into that pre-seed stage, developing the business plan, the commercial use cases. And for both companies, we've had extreme interest from the private sector for equity-based funding, and even a couple of commentary coming out of government with the Canadian Space Agency and NASA.
Have you been working with CSA on all of these projects, or is it something is that down the road a piece?
It is down the road a piece. I am lightly involved with the Canadian Space Agency. I'd say they're pretty high barrier entry, but the stuff that they do create is absolutely incredible. I'm pleased to know some really amazing engineers over there. They're absolutely incredible. I've been invited to take a little trip down to the Canadian Space Agency in 2024 and maybe give a little speech about some of the exciting stuff that's coming out of Canadian space innovation. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to maybe expand the efforts with Canada.
Now, you've been mentoring others in STEM, so tell us about your experience with that and how do you go about it?
Yes, I consider myself so lucky to be able to pass along some of the knowledge and tips that I've gained throughout my journey thus far in STEM. In particular, I've had the privilege to speak with some really inspiring young individuals who are in secondary or even post-secondary school, trying to find the appropriate channels to help them break into the industry. With every person that I meet and mentor, I take great interest in hearing about their story and their passion for joining the space industry in the first place, actively seeking opportunities for personal development and growth amongst the broader mission of space itself. Many of these individuals I've connected with while participating in space events, conferences, competitions. NASA Space Apps Challenge is a good one to mention. There are so many brilliant innovations for a variety of applications, whether it's earth science, greenhouse gases, or combating some of the problems in clean energy development or developing sustainable propulsion. I've had the pleasure of speaking to some people who are absolutely imaginative dreamers that have the science knowledge to back up what they're saying. And as part of these discussions, when I go to mentor people, I always like to encourage people to become part of the open science community, especially with NASA, since they're such a big consortium. Another one I would mention is to maybe become involved with NASA's Lunar Surface Innovation Consortium, or LSIC. Not only would you get to meet some pretty incredible individuals, the majority of which have decades of industry experience, but you might also find a relevant opportunity to contribute time and effort to developing something interesting. So it's always a tip I like to pass along to youth.
How do you then motivate young people to pursue STEM careers? Do you find that kids are all into video games and, it seems like, how do you get them to look at science, technology, engineering, and manufacturing and say, this is a good career path? because it's not one where you're going to be an influencer and make $1 billion by being on TikTok.
Absolutely. You know, to get people interested in STEM, it's nearly impossible. To be honest, it's an inherent quality that people build within themselves. I can speak to my personal experience. I was exposed to various learning activities and science programs as a child, which really helped foster my initial interest that I had in STEM. And I think it's a similar parallel for today's youth. Getting people motivated in space, having projects, seeking opportunities for them to grow. Getting involved in hackathons, competitions, that kind of thing really gets people inspired. I'd say if you can find a direct use case, find something that you're really interested in, and then actually look for something in space that is directly tied to what you want to create, it's a really good place to start. If you're talking about wanting to get involved directly in the process, like I said, open science programs coming out of some space agencies are a great intro. If you're wanting to get internships, or if you're just wanting to know more or volunteer. There's a couple of private industry companies and just online web platforms that are non-for-profit, like Zooniverse, which is a digital platform that offers like interactive activities for anyone who wants to contribute research to various institutes, universities, and government agencies. The Science Art Exchange is another great place that kind of combines STEM and art to create something called STEAM, which is a kind of new industry acronym for science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. I'd say developing a personal interest in STEM often comes with engaging in platforms and activities like that. And that's the type of message that I want to send to today's youth. There's an abundance of opportunity to become involved in science, and it's really one step away. If you take the time and research it, you'd probably be really surprised what you can discover.
I want to come back to a little bit more about you personally, because I know that when I was, I think, 9 in 1969, and I watched the first moon landing, that was kind of one of my aha moments for I'd like to be involved in some way in space. What was it for you?
It is a very long story.
We got time.
Yeah, we've got time. I'd say my initial interest started, oh gosh, it was probably around 9 or 10 when I started getting interested in space. Kind of as just a hobby for me. In junior high school, I created a 3D CAD model prototype for a Mars habitat that was created using 3D printers. And I actually submitted it to NASA to see if anyone was interested in developing the theory into an actual technology. That didn't actually take off. And I always kind of just kept a passion for space, for 3D printing. And when I was 16, I was approached by the same NASA office that I had previously sent that project off to. And they offered me a contract position to come and review some innovations for science instruments that were being developed for terrestrial and lunar use. To kind of put it in short, they were understaffed and they needed anybody who was interested in science. And I was like, sign me up. Since then, I've gained such a wealth of knowledge and insights about an array of different technology processes, field studies, and kind of the finer mechanics of what government contracting is, which is a useful skill for any space entrepreneur.
So, go ahead.
I'm just talking away. To talk about my kind of personal background, again, I'm engaged in commerce. I'm getting my undergraduate degree right now. In 2022, I graduated from a program with Harvard Business School that was focused on innovation and entrepreneurship, which has definitely been extremely useful in adding a business perspective to my science knowledge. And then just kind of as a hobby, I've spent the last few years volunteering my time doing some data analysis work for European Space Agency, National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, kind of those US government and international government agencies in particular. So really happy to contribute some of my research finding to various publications and books, one of which is scheduled to be published at the end of this year. It's a book on artificial intelligence for Earth resource management that was commissioned by the White House.
You've got me feeling like such a slacker. When I was an undergrad, I just wanted to be on the radio. And I managed, but anyway, getting back to our topic at hand, does the general public, do you feel like, realize the importance of the space industry to their everyday lives?
General public, they are fickle. I generally say people who aren't in the sector still have a bit of an interest in what's going on, but it's more of an imaginative perspective, right? It's not the science core. When you're looking at what STEM principles really are, it's to push the boundaries of what humankind is capable of, right? And I think that this is kind of the mindset that's embedded in all of us, regardless of our level of knowledge in such activities. I've had the pleasure of conversing with people who are either in the industry or are completely out of it, polar opposite. And I believe that everyone has an understanding to some degree that space holds potential, not only for humans to go beyond where anyone on this planet has dared to go before, but just really to think about the resulting benefits that space technology development has had here on Earth. Like, for example, take a look at some of the technology that NASA has innovated that we use in everyday life, like Teflon or memory foam or cordless tools or water filters. There's so much that's really been adopted by the general public as a direct result of innovations that were designed for space. And that doesn't include things like modern medicine and improved iterations for industries like construction, mining, power. All of these things have directly been positively influenced by space, and given how much space is integrated into our everyday lives, I think on a subconscious level, there's a bit of a common understanding how valuable the industry is for our global future.
I'm talking with Madison Feehan on the Ex Terra Podcast. Take a moment right now to click subscribe to be sure you don't miss any of our podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube, any of the videos from Ex Terra, the Journal of Space Commerce. Madison, what educational paths are essential for a career in space, and what diverse career options are available in the field?
Well, Tom, that's a very thoughtful and compelling question. It's fueled purely by personal perspective for me as an entrepreneur in this industry. I see an innate value in combining STEM, any kind of science correlated technology education, with kind of the other less commonly space-regarded sectors, such as business and law. The reason that I say this is because of creating an inherent safety net of knowledge in a variety of disciplines, you're more readily able as an individual to really understand how the space industry works, not just from a bureaucratic perspective, but really taking the time to understand from a science perspective what it takes technologically to develop complex hardwares or softwares for use in space. And then on the opposite side of things, seeing what it takes to create a valuable business proposition for the technology's commercial development in the first place. And then finally, as I mentioned, law, really understanding the channels, regulations, and legal bodies that surround the development and launch of these technologies. So in this industry, it's not just scientists. Though their contributions, of course, serve as the backbone for all the critical technology development. But the workforce itself, it's comprised of individuals from almost every single career path imaginable, whether it's the STEM topics or people who are in the non-core STEM-related activities. You meet basically everybody in the industry. And if you're finding some sort of sector that's not conventional, but you're still passionate about it and you can work it into the space sector, there's probably a really good opening for it.
So then what personal experiences have been pivotal in building your network and establishing a presence in the space industry, especially through programs in entrepreneurship and STEM?
I have to say, personal networking opportunities have been fundamental in establishing my personal presence in the industry. It's a high barrier sector to enter, and it takes a lot of perseverance to become part of. A main source of credit that goes towards having established my industry presence is to become part of several consortiums and committees. I'm a member of the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, Global Expert Group on Sustainable Lunar Activities, or as we just like to cut it down to the acronym called GEGSLA. Also a member of Women in Aerospace Canada, National Small Business Association, American Society for Gravitational and Space Research, if I'm remembering it correctly. All of these places, American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics is another one. I pursued all of these organizations myself, creating accounts, getting involved in monthly meetings, meeting people, and through that, it just kind of catalyzed and expanded to include other opportunities. That's where I got to know about conferences and certain people in the industry who were in the exact sector of additive manufacturing or lunar mining that I wanted to get to know and become part of. I think a great deal of it trails back to personal research, looking for proper channels to become affiliated with and actually taking the stride to reach out and get connected. And it's daunting. It's daunting for sure. These organizations each have their own goals for research and development in space, whether it's legislative policy or actual hardware development. Meanwhile, some of those other institutes are aimed at solving the real world technical challenges and kind of mitigating how industry interacts with space agencies. So being a part of organizations like that, first of all, it inspired me to become even more in depth into the industry, to take it from a hobby to a personal, professional career development step, but also really understanding and gaining some perspective from the experts at these places to know what they want to see, how you can help, how you can become part of the greater initiative. So yeah, to kind of summarize it, being part of those conferences, organizations, institutes, that was a real motivator for me.
So how do you find then the motivation to keep pursuing those things? As you said, it's a high bar, and you probably get told no a lot, or maybe you don't. It doesn't sound like you do, but a lot of people might. How do you find that motivation to take that no and turn it into a yes?
There are a lot of no's coming out of that industry. Do not be surprised to hear that anybody who breaks into the space industry, it doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur or not, you're going to hear no about 500 times before you hear one yes. That was actually one of the principles that they taught us on the first day of the Techstars Accelerator that Space Copy was a part of, is that you're going to hear all of these no's, and everybody's going to tell you, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. This is too high barrier for you to enter. It's too high stakes of an industry. You can't go around messing with certain technologies like this. You have to have perseverance. You have to be very deeply motivated. It's a passion of the heart, really. It's not something that you can convey in words or read in a textbook. It has to be the thing that you eat, sleep, and breathe. And every morning when you wake up, you have to be thinking about what's going on in space. You have to be interested in wanting to get to know what other people are doing in space. And then you have to put yourself out there. And I think if you can do all of those things, you have a fairly high chance of getting some yeses sooner rather than later.
Now, Madison, the world is entering a challenging financial time. We've got the aftermath of COVID. There's often the necessity of government intervention. And yet there is opportunity in the midst of all this chaos. So how do you advise those who wish to enter the space industry, either in the private or the public sectors?
Wow, this really can't be emphasized enough, really. The aftermath of the COVID pandemic has left a lot of lives overturned, not just in space, but in general. And now you're looking at the space economy, and you can see that even in this vast and sprawling industry, people are struggling to recover. Mm-hmm. If you take a look at what happened to Silicon Valley Bank, you can see that the influx of private capital through equity investments started to improve. Then it went down. Then it's starting to level off again. Honestly, the landscape for emerging players to enter the industry is high barrier enough on its own, but to see all of these different factors like the aftermath of COVID coming into play, there's more challenges than ever before. But I like to say that the interest in space is at its peak now. And you hear everybody talking about Artemis. You hear everybody talking, okay, there's this astronaut who's being trained. Canada in particular, we're so proud we have astronauts going to the moon. The funding levels that you saw in previous years have definitely dropped off, but they're picking back up again. Mm-hmm. And I'd say if you can find a good market gap that solves a challenge to an active problem that you see in space, you will have a much better chance at successfully raising a round that would help your small business take off. Now, for those looking to enter the space industry, if you're an entrepreneur, choose your business model wisely and make sure there's a direct path to profitability. This is one of the crash course things that I learned getting into it as an entrepreneur, transitioning from just government contractor to also actively building a technology that's going to be sent to space one day. If you're more interested on the research side of things, though, I would recommend staying out of the venture capital zone and opting to seek opportunities within government space agencies and academic sectors. Go work in those sectors if that's what you want. If you want the research, go there. Most space agencies offer really great internship programs and career transfer opportunities that are highly beneficial for new entrants. Or, like me, you can seek government contractor roles that would help you kind of build the soft skills that you need to transition from reviewer to proposer if you're actively seeking funding for an early stage innovation that you want to develop as an entrepreneur.
A lot of times, though, government programs like SBIR are important for budding entrepreneurs. How do you negotiate the regulations like ITAR and EAR and secure that federal funding when starting a space company?
As a matter of fact, SBIR is on our watch list for 2024. I actually spent over the last 3 or 4 years in particular reviewing some of the technologies that were being proposed by SBIR. It's geared towards incredibly specific funding categories. And each year there's around 4 to 5 calls for that specific program. Although a drawback of this, which goes for many US government grants, are things like citizenship requirements and certain entity structures that must be adopted for eligibility. This is one of the restrictions that I've faced as a Canadian entrepreneur, is how to navigate federal funding landscapes, knowing that the entry requirements are really high and that there's difficulty for citizenship. I'd say knowing the ins and outs of government contracting comes with its benefits. So there's going to be some exciting new switch ups in the next couple of years in regards to Space Copy, and even Moon Trades maybe popping up on some SBIR applications and some other funding programs happening out of NASA and the DoD. But to finish the other half of your question, yes, specifically pertaining to ITAR and EAR, it's a regulatory hurdle to climb, especially for the small businesses. In particular, for example, Space Copy is established as both a Canadian and an American entity, which helps tremendously. You don't have to worry about that knowledge sharing going across borders and running into ITAR regulations if you're having business in all the countries that your members are citizens of. Also, just as a personal aside, being part of a United Nations working group also gives me a little insight into how the EAR policies in particular are changing on a global scale. There's a sudden influx of international space participation, heavily so from kind of the non-governmental industry players. You look at the big companies and even the small businesses that are coming out of Asia, Europe, North America. It's going to be interesting to see how the regulations affect those small businesses and in turn how they affect me personally. But when starting a space company, I've learned it's best to enter the ring with your eyes wide open and consistently gain some knowledge before and during project developments that you're not dealing with it after the fact. And the more you can learn about ITAR and EAR, the better off you're going to be.
Probably good advice for almost any type of business. I want to come back just for a moment to Space Copy, because when you talk about a multi-purpose device under development by that company, what does that mean?
Multi-purpose encompasses a series of smaller functions that are built into the device's technology. I'm going to keep things high level here, but
that's fine.
Space Copy involves basically its manufacturing, research bank, and testing laboratory all into one compact device. What we do is we do a bulk chemistry analysis of the lunar soil using advanced spectroscopy, data of which is later collected and analyzed. Then we proceed to create a high durability feedstock by industrially pre-processing the regolith. After this, we use a novel selective laser melting printer, which will allow us to create really complex geometries without the need for external supports. Furthermore, benefits of that is that you can reduce, reuse, and recycle everything that doesn't work the first time you print it. Then the entire operating system is tied together with an integrated AI-based algorithm software that collects feedback from all of the iterative processes that I just described to help users discover the strengths and weaknesses of the system, as well as learn about the regolith's composition and viability for use, which in turn will help to improve the equipment that is developed for future lunar missions.
Is it designed to operate autonomously, or does it need to have human intervention?
We are designing it for both use cases just because we don't know quite when we're going to line up there. We're looking to load our payload onto Starship in the late 2020s or early 2030s. So depending on whether or not Artemis is caught up to having a human base established by then. In any case, think of it as a modular system with the option of autonomous function if needed. I'd say the broader vision here is to create a company that provides an innovative solution to the aerospace industry's greatest challenges in a reliable and efficient manner. And that can only be addressed when space agencies consider, what lunar colonization takes, what we can do as a private company to cut down on the cost, weight, and risk that's associated with frequent resupply payloads. And then in turn, how can we use the local resources as building blocks needed to produce things like interlocking components for launch pads and habitats, bricks, pipes, repair parts, tools, all that kind of thing is what we look to develop. And as a personal aside, I think I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, we are not just developing this product for use in space, we're also developing it for extreme environments here on Earth. So if you're looking for military applications, say you're out in the middle of nowhere, you're in a desert, you don't have access to infrastructure development, Space Copy's 3D printer would also be integrated into functions like that as well, producing infrastructure, roadways, bricks for habitats, anything that you need when you're in a place where you can't get regular supplies shipped to you.
Can that be done quickly enough in that kind of a rapid deployment environment?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're looking at the whole scaling up the technology right now because we want to be rapid prototyping. You don't want to spend 20 hours making one brick. I think for lunar manufacturing, it's very helpful to use a little mix of automated and traditional 3D printing methods. And suffice it to say, let's build it and see where it goes from there.
Sounds like a plan. We are just about out of time, Madison, but I want you, and we do this of all of our guests, we ask this to look out, if you might, over the next 10 to 15 years in space commerce and your role in it, and tell me what you see.
Next 10 to 15 years. I see growth beyond our wildest dreams and expectations. Of course, it's predicted that it takes a lot longer than you originally anticipate to develop and launch technologies that will actually be used in space. And in turn, that leads to cost increases in fiscal budgets, unexpected challenges from both a technical and business perspective. But what you need to do is create a sustainable and profitable economy out of it. And I would say the next decade or two will really redefine how humankind looks at this industry. Whether you're directly involved in the space race or not, we are all a living part of history, and we are the Artemis generation. As Kennedy said in 1962, we choose to go to the moon, and that sentiment is as true now as it was back then. You look at the term ad astra per aspera. It's a Latin term coined over 2,000 years ago, citing that through hardship, we will reach the stars. That same resilience and motivation to accomplish the goals of humanity is stronger than ever now, and our technical capabilities as a global race are greater than ever before. So I'd wrap it up by saying that through both innovation and perseverance, I see this industry revitalizing what space really means and how we can be part of it. And I see both Space Copy and Moon Trades leading these initiatives within their own respective divisions. And everything that I've achieved so far in space has really happened in the last 5 years. So I can only imagine the journey that the next 10 or 15 will bring. Surely I will gain hold of these opportunities now more than ever to really catalyze the growth of my startups and poise them as leaders in space manufacturing and mining. And I greatly anticipate the journey that I have ahead. So be on the lookout for it.
And of course, the rest of that Kennedy quote is, we choose to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And it sounds like you're well positioned to take on those hard challenges.
Absolutely. And I love the challenge. I embrace it. It's part of one of the many great things that makes this industry so inspiring to be part of. And I consider myself a privileged stakeholder.
Well, Madison, it's been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. So pleased to be here on the Ex Terra Podcast. Thank you so much for hosting me.
Madison Feehan is the COO of Space Copy and the co-founder and CFO of Moon Trades. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Ex Terra Podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version of the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Audible, and many other popular podcasting platforms. Be sure to click on subscribe so you don't miss any of our podcasts or any of our other videos. You can get daily updates on space commerce by following the Journal of Space Commerce on Substack. And one thing more, be sure to connect with us on X at XTerraJSC and follow us on LinkedIn. Until next time, I'm Tom Patton. Thanks for joining us.
I wanna go faster, faster. Hands in the air, we're gonna crash. Searching for the answers. My Galileo, the proof is looking glass. Thirst for reason. Our dreamer's eyes we gaze into. A sense of purpose, know my view. Like finding one.